Welcome back to the program. Here in the studio, Paul Kelly and Troy Bramston. We're joined now by the Parliamentary Secretary for Communications, Paul Fletcher, who joins us live from Perth. Paul, good morning to you. The issue of same-sex marriage, it looks like there is a group, not a large group, but one with strongly held views that wants a conscience vote, a free vote allowed. When you look at what the Prime Minister said before the last election, Paul, he did say that he'd allow the party room to decide. What's your sense? Will there be a discussion when Parliament resumes in a month or so?
Well, good morning, Kieran. I guess the first thing to say is that in the Liberal Party room, any member is free to raise any issue, and so that's always a question of what it is that members of the party room choose to raise. As to the question of whether there might be a free vote, the first thing is that there needs to be a bill before the party room. So the normal way the party room works is that every week there's a list of bills that are coming up for consideration in the Parliament, and those are considered by the party room. But the thing that has to happen before that is that there needs to be a bill which is being introduced into the Parliament and is to be debated. And so that's really a necessary prior condition before the question of how such a bill would be dealt with arises.
But if we just look at the issue in principle, what's your judgment about sentiment in the party room on a conscience vote?
Well, my sense is that there isn't a clear or strong or discernible view. In a sense, I think some of the public debate is running well ahead of where the party room might be. Look, the Prime Minister has made the point this week that before a bill can be considered by the party room, it must first be introduced into the Parliament. Now, at the moment, there was a bill in relation to same-sex marriage that was put forward by Bill Shorten, largely as an attempt to distract from the various challenges that he's facing, including the upcoming Labor National Conference, the Royal Commission into corruption in trade unions and so on. So Bill Shorten has a lot that he's looking for distraction from, and so he therefore chose to bring in a bill at pretty short notice, introduce a private member's bill a few weeks ago. Now, the issue is that as an ordinary matter of the way that the House of Representatives operates, it's a question for the government of the day to determine the business of the House of Representatives. The government's bills are the ones that take up most of the time, and of course the Abbott government has a substantial agenda, a lot of legislation that we want to get through on issues to do with national security, keeping Australians safe, and on issues to do with economic security, making sure that we continue to be a prosperous and competitive economy, generating the prosperity that all the incidents of a civilised society like education and health and so on need to be paid for. So,
I understand all the procedural issues about the bill. But let's cut to the chase here. Let me just ask you, why doesn't Tony Abbott agree to have the debate in the party room and have the decision about whether or not there should be a conscience vote? I mean, aren't there dangers in trying to defer this indefinitely?
Well, I think the simple point I'm making is that there is a normal process by which the party room deals with bills, and you need to have a bill before you, and then you have the question of how you deal with it, including the question of whether there would be a free vote. That's to say, a vote in which individual party members, parliamentarians, vote according to their choice rather than according to a determined party position. Can I say, in my time in the Parliament over 5 years, free votes are an extremely rare thing. In fact, I don't recollect one. I haven't gone back and checked, but I don't recollect one. So it's a pretty unusual thing, but that's not to say that it doesn't happen from time to time. It certainly does happen from time to time, but for the moment the issue is that there isn't a bill for the party room to consider, other than, of course, the one that Bill Shorten introduced, and the Prime Minister made it clear at the time that if that bill failed to meet a threshold condition, in that it was a bill advanced by one party rather than being a bill of the Parliament.
Mr Fletcher, can I ask you about cross-media ownership laws? This is an area within your portfolio. There have been a number of commentary this week about the so-called reach rule, particularly affecting regional broadcasters. There's some very strong messages to the government coming from those regional broadcasters, and the Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, has previously indicated that he would be willing to look at changes to cross-media ownership rules. Where are those proposals up to at the moment, and are we likely to see anything from the government side on changes to these laws before the next election?
Well, look, the Prime Minister has indicated that he's not minded to support changes to the reach rule. The issue is that the reach rule at the moment would restrict the capacity of the major metropolitan media operators to acquire the regionals, Win and Prime and so on. There's no doubt that the regional broadcasters, Win, Prime, Southern Cross, are under significant economic pressure. Free-to-air television is under economic pressure, and the regional broadcasters face an additional specific set of pressures. For example, when viewers look at catch-up television online, catch-up television, they're typically looking at the metropolitan news television channels, websites, for example, rather than the regionals. So there are some specific economic pressures on the regionals in addition to the general pressures. Okay, but can I ask you, there are those indeed economic pressures, but isn't there also some political pressures? Because the coalition parties obviously have more seats outside of the major cities than the Labor Party does, and you might find some pressure from rural and regional MPs to address this issue before the next election. Are you alive to that? Oh, look, certainly a number of regional members of Parliament are concerned, rightly, about the continuing vigour and health of the media services that serve regional communities. And as you rightly say, the majority of regional and remote electorates in Australia are held by coalition MPs. So yes, this is an issue that has been raised by a number of regional MPs. The Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, convened a meeting in Parliament House with the chief executives of at least two of the regional broadcasters to give them the opportunity to meet with and hear from regional MPs so that those coalition MPs could express their views about the importance of a continuing vigorous provision of service in regional television.
Okay. Paul Fletcher, only about a minute or so left on the program, but I want to get your view on where the ABC is at in the long-running saga of the Q&A matter. Are you satisfied? I know that the Communications Minister was certainly pleased that belatedly the board did do something in response. What's your sense of where things are at right now? Is the ABC back in the good books?
Well, look, the ABC made a serious error of judgment in having Mr Zaki Mallah come on to Q&A in a position where he could ask a question on live television, not pre-recorded but live, and it took quite some time for the ABC, I think, to acknowledge the scale of the issue. It perhaps would have been better if the managing director had very clearly the next day got the facts, spoken to the executive producer, expressed his concerns, said that publicly. That might have been a much better approach to crisis management, frankly, than the approach that was taken, where things seemed to roll on for quite some time. The Minister commissioned an inquiry conducted by the Department of Communications, which looked at the circumstances in which Mr Mallah was asked to come on. It emerged that the ABC had made some efforts to check with independent authorities hadn't got an answer and had decided to press on anyway, had only looked at his social media as going back to August or September, I think, last year, 2014, hadn't looked at his more recent social media, including the appalling tweet in which he called for 2 prominent female journalists to be publicly raped and so on. So not a great day, not a great episode for the ABC.
Paul Fletcher, we're out of time. Thanks so much joining us live from Perth.
Thank you.
Troy Bramston, Paul Kelly, thanks this morning, and thank you for your company. We'll see you next time.